Welcome to Windy Night Stories. Tonight's story is by Manda Crocker. Thrilling experience. A strange ghost story told in a wayside inn. Don't believe in the ghost business. They had been discussing the supernatural around the cheerful hearth at Merrill's Inn, and as usual, Harry Ludwig was on the off-side, as the landlord remarked. No one seemed ready to venture anything, pro or con, in answer to the above remark, for Harry was a glib arguer, and of course not a man of them desired to come out second best in a discussion of the mysterious. But presently the old landlord, who was a firm believer in spiritual visitants, broke the silence by saying timidly, There's some mighty queer occurrences, then, unless we're not allowed to believe anybody, I'll allow. The voluble Harry hesitated in replying to this, for some unaccountable reason, but a stranger, who had stopped for the night in this country inn, and who, up to this time, had not spoken a word, but had sat down in the corner with his hat pulled down over his eyes, now sighed audibly. The deep-drawn inspiration arrested the attention of the mysterious loving host instantly, and he drew his chair nearer to the strange guest, and scented a ghost story. Might ye have any experiences to relate in this line, mister? If you have, I'll back ye in 'em by believing 'em, for I've a great leanin' toward the spirits myself. Thus invited, the man in the corner pushed up his hat and looked around the circle of expectant faces. Harry Ludwig became strangely attentive for an unbeliever, and taking the cigar from his mouth, knocked off the ashes against his thumb meditatively, and seconded the host by saying, Yes, we're all quite ready for a story. Well, said the stranger, I've only got one such story to relate, and that, permit me to say it, is true. I can vouch for its truthfulness, because it happened to be an experience of my own. Here, Harry Ludwig glanced furtively around the group, and the landlord braced up triumphantly and resorted to the cuspidor as a safety valve. I was traveling in the South, began the guest again, after an impressive pause, and was domiciled for a few weeks with friends not far from Atlanta. It was my custom while there to ride out each day into the country on horseback, accompanied by some member of the family. On one of these occasions the eldest son, a bright youth of perhaps 20, bore me company. After riding farther than usual, and returning, as I thought, by a roundabout way, I suggested that we turn into a by-road to our right and shorten our route, as it was getting late. At my mention of the change of route, the young fellow grew visibly agitated and objected strongly. Why not? I asked, my curiosity aroused. Because, he answered reluctantly, I'd rather not. You may laugh at me, Mr. Nixon, but I have not the courage to ride through Harlem Road, especially at this time of night. My look of incredulous questioning rather dashed him, but seeing an explanation was expected, he lowered his voice to a very confidential key and said, There's a strange, mysterious story connected with the road, Mr. Nixon, which keeps most of us from crossing here after sundown. Ah, ejaculated I, as he hesitated. Then he continued with a shiver. There was a young lady killed, a half-mile down this road, and her lover found her and became so frantic with grief over her loss that it was the death of him, you know. No, I don't know, I answered, growing strangely fascinated by his tone and manner. No, of course not. How dull of me to forget, he replied, gazing down the byway, half hidden already in the shadows of the gathering dusk. Then, as if recollecting that I was waiting for the rest of the tragical narrative, he went on with the entire story. Ellie Wentworth used to live up here a ways, and he pointed the way we had come, and she had a lover, very much devoted, but an invalid. The Wentworths objected to the marriage because of his continued ill health, so the lovers were obliged to wait. Meantime Howard Keith, the lover, kept visiting Allie, and they were passably happy. One evening he called, as usual, but she had gone for a ride and had not returned. He sat talking with the family, waiting her coming, and never had seemed so well or in better spirits. Suddenly, however, he sprang to his feet, exclaiming, "Oh, Allie, love, what is the matter?" All started up in alarm, but could see nothing. "Where?" they questioned in affright, seeing Keith's white face and terrified manner. "Oh, don't you see?" he made answer, staring into space. The blood is running all down her face, and she stares so." With this he started forward, but whatever he saw vanished, for he turned to the horrified family and moaned out, "Allie is dead. Oh, my God." Then he fled down this road, it being the one she was expected to take on her return. "I am going to find Allie," he cried wildly as he rushed away. The family, having seen nothing, followed him, not clearly understanding what they were doing. It was now dusk, but they followed on. Presently the horse Allie had ridden away rushed by them furiously. "Oh," they wailed in chorus, "Howard is right, and Allie is killed." In a few moments they met Keith, coming at a rapid pace, bearing in his arms the form of their daughter. The blood was running from a ghastly wound in her right temple, but already her heart had ceased to beat. Keith staggered towards them with his precious burden, and uttered a low cry of deepest anguish. Mr. Wentworth caught the lifeless body of Allie in his arms, just as Howard fell prone on the earth in a dead faint. In some manner, they could not recall, they managed to get them home, the dead and the dying, for Howard Keith never rallied from the awful shock occasioned by Allie's terrible death. The physician said that if his health had been better, he might have survived, but as it was, he succumbed. Well, they buried them side by side in a deep, wide grave, and it was dreadful. And ever since, there's a horse rushes down Harlem Road just after dark, and anyone possessing courage enough to patrol this byway after nightfall can see a phantom lover bearing a phantom girl hurriedly through the shadows, so they say. They say, too, that the apparition is true, in form and features, to Howard Keith and Allie Wentworth. For my part, I would rather not investigate, and he turned his horse's head homeward. "Hold on," said I. "If I will be brave enough to ride down Harlem Road, will you be kind enough to wait here for my return?" "But your horse will get frightened," he said, with a shudder, evading my question. I remembered, perhaps not any too soon, that the horse I rode was rather skittish, so I changed my tactics. "Will you take charge of my horse, then, if I take a stroll into Ghostum?" "I wouldn't walk that way, if I were in your place, Mr. Nixon," he replied, "for perhaps you will get more of a ghostum than you care for. I will hold your horse for you, however, but not here. I will ride up the main road a short distance." "All right," I ejaculated, and dismounting, gave Dorr Slater the rein, who left me to my foolhardy undertaking, as he called it. In a trice he was cantering away, calling after me as a parting shot that, if 'twas the death of me, he would not be to blame. I was very curious to solve the only supernatural mystery coming directly under my personal notice, and I started down the ghost walk, curtained with dusky shadows, with an enthusiasm which proved to be short-lived. As I proceeded, a solemnity seemed settling down through the gloom that amounted to oppressiveness, but I was fain to account for it from the story my young friend had just related, and so pushed on. A few stars now lighted the gloaming, and the wind went hurriedly by, while I strained every sense to catch sight, sound, or unseen presence of the supernatural. Presently I became aware of something coming toward me, although I heard nothing, and less saw anything. Nevertheless, I was aware of a presence somewhere in the vicinity, and, instinctively, I stepped to the side of the road to let it pass. As it came closer, I distinguished the form of a dark horse, and I involuntarily started. I held my breath as it dashed past, in mad affright, with keenest terror depicted in every motion. I saw plainly the outline of a saddle, partly turned on him, and noticed, with a strange attentiveness, that his hind feet were white. After he had fled by me, I stood still, feeling like beating a retreat. I vaguely wondered when the rest of the strange scene would put in its appearance, and whether I had better go, or still remain in this uncanny surrounding. While I hesitated, I became conscious of losing my identity and willpower, and found that I could not move, try hard as I might. In a moment more of the form of a tall, lithe-looking man came round a bend in the road, and in his arms he bore the apparently lifeless form of a girl. I saw distinctly the white drapery and long golden hair of the womanly figure, floating in the wind, but her face was partly hidden against the bosom of her phantom lover. I am certain, too, that I never, before or since, beheld a face so full of despair and wordless grief as that of the apparition, passing me at a rapid gait. In all this experience, I was not conscious of the least noise. Not a footstep, nor the sound of a single hoofbeat had come to my ears, even when the frightened steed galloped madly down the road. What or whom I had seen I could not say, unless the story of young Slater was true, and I had seen the spirits of the hapless girl and her lover enacting the sad tragedy of Harlem Road, as was their wont. When I came to myself again, I felt that the half had not been portrayed in the story. There was a grandeur of terror about the whole adventure not to be put into words. To be understood, it would have to be experienced. I found my young friend waiting for me some distance up the main road, which I reached without further incident. It seemed to me that I had been gone an age, notwithstanding the protest of my companion, and the time indicated by my watch to the contrary. So sure was I that I had spent the greatest part of the night, at least, with supernatural associations, that I could not credit the truth of Dwarf Slater's assertion until I lighted a match and consulted the timepiece. He was greatly relieved, however, to find me safe and unharmed on my return from my stroll down Harlem Road, and I remounted my horse, and we proceeded homeward. I told him my experience as we rode along, and he vowed that he should never be fool enough to go mooning down that by-road. The recital of the affair was enough for him. The next day I had to go through the recital of my thrilling experience in Harlem Crosscut for the benefit of the mystery-loving friends and acquaintances I had made during my sojourn near Atlanta. As I rehearsed the adventure in detail, I felt the sensation of horror stealing over me that I experienced in that lonely spot, and from that day to this, the wordless dread settles over my very soul as I recount this story. There, gentlemen, you have my ghost story. An experience, once undergone, can never be forgotten. No, never. And the sad-looking stranger pulled his hat down over his eyes again and lit a cigar. The vindication of the supernatural was clear. The old landlord of Merrill's Inn was triumphant in his backing of the ghost business, and Harry Ludwig buttoned up his ulster and, with a cynical look around the room, as if its inmates were not good enough for him, desired that it was time to go home. The end.